Baldur's Gate 3 is a monumental game that has now come to define a generation in gaming, putting Larian Studios on the map for so many people. Many don't realize they've been hard at work developing games for years with an IP that they own that isn't D&D, known as Divinity. Divinity's most recent release was Divinity Original Sin 2, a CRPG much like Baldur's Gate 3, but by many standards, a better CRPG than Baldur's Gate 3. Today, I'm going to go take a look at both games and compare them to discern which is the better game. We'll consider the following criteria: graphics, story, player agency or freedom, customization, combat, and then, of course, loot. All rounding out with a cumulative result. Please bear in mind that this is all conjecture based on my observations and opinions. I am Soul Invictus, and let's shed some light on the topic. First, taking a look at graphics. Divinity Original Sin 2 released in 2017, and at the time of its release, Larian Studios was a smaller company that served a niche audience. Excuses aside, Divinity Original Sin 2's graphics are not as clean, crisp, or up-to-date as Baldur's Gate 3's are. With its 2023 release, however, the differences are not the gulf and gap you might expect. While Baldur's Gate 3 clearly looks better, it is only a step ahead instead of 5 steps. This is especially true when it comes to third-person overhead with a good distance between you and your interactables. Differences in graphics become less and less noticeable at this distance. Now, this is where Baldur's Gate 3 comes in strong as a modern representation of what CRPG should be doing. Cinematic dialogues and detailed character expressions are amazing. Divinity Original Sin 2 doesn't offer this feature, which can have a large impact on how much you enjoy the game visually. All in all, Baldur's Gate 3 is the better looking game, but only marginally. Let's talk about the story. Now, this is where things get interesting in my opinion. As I just mentioned, Baldur's Gate 3 does a better job of illustrating a story with its wonderful visuals and character expression during close-up interactions, something Divinity Original Sin 2 does not offer. However, the narration and the voice acting is just as good, if not better, with Divinity Original Sin 2. This may be a bias here, but coming from a generation of gamers where we used to read our drama with tones and voice acting of our own imaginings, I am unbothered by the lack of close-up facial animations and welcome a good voice acting as opposed to mediocre efforts seen in other games. Looking past the game's ability to tell the story, let's assess the stories themselves in a spoiler-free fashion. Baldur's Gate 3 offers surprise, intrigue, drama, and a clearer linear path towards an understood goal. Albeit simple, the goal enterprises into a grand journey with many choices along the way. While I love the game, I never took a real interest in the story though. As a fan of D&D lore, I knew what to expect of the Githyanki and their involvement. It took place in a universe where the parameters have been established and set for many stories to take place. Basically, I immediately saw the scope of the story and all of its limitations. This put a huge dampener on how much I could expect from my adventures in Baldur's Gate 3. Moments of intrigue felt mild, and instead of being surprised, I started predicting the story to a greater effect as I made my way through the campaign. That being said, it was still a very well-told story, even if a bit predictable at times. With Divinity Original Sin 2, the lore is a bit more of a mystery to me, and I couldn't tell you what would possibly come next with certainty. This makes sense because we don't have libraries of information on the lore in this universe. That lack of information already creates a level of intrigue that just can't be paralleled by a story within the confines of a defined universe. Expressive storyteller freedom is what you encounter within Divinity Original Sin 2. something I felt Larian does a good job at capitalizing on. The world is as simple as you want it to be, with tons of lore for you to delve into and learn more from. Not only is there more to explore in Divinity Original Sin 2 than Baldur's Gate 3, you also have the surprise and the mystery of what can be found under each rock unearthed. The scope of the story can and does grow to amazing heights, leaving you with a sincere sense of wonder and fulfillment as you learn more and more through your adventure. In all, Baldur's Gate 3 is an ever-growing set of errands with checklists along the way, and Divinity Original Sin 2 is a trip to the grocery store with no spending cap, no clear expectations, and an appetite to urge your boundless impulses. Now, let's talk about player agency, or freedom. I'll help make my last analogy make some sense here, okay? Both games would see you carry out a central task. Divinity provides the setting and the guidelines, i.e., the grocery store, then releases you into the setting with a little direction. Baldur's Gate 3 drives you to the store, tells you what to get, limits your choices on how to get it, and then guides you through each aisle until you're done. I'll go over this again without the analogy. In Divinity Original Sin 2, you are physically confined at the start of your journey. The path has a hard guardrail that directs you along a linear direction, but the path grows more and more diverse as you carry on. In Baldur's Gate 3, it is similar in the start, with a few forking paths that all intersect and interweave through the core plot points. Where the two differ is in how you handle those plot points. Baldur's Gate 3 creates a few clear-cut ways to navigate each of its hurdles, while Divinity Original Sin 2 does less and less hand-holding as the game progresses. This may just be my feeling here, but I felt that I could tackle quite a few plot points in very diverse ways with few barriers in Divinity Original Sin 2. If I were clever enough to think of it, I was often rewarded. This isn't just true of major plot points either, but the world at large. One thing that I was frustrated by in Baldur's Gate 3 was the dice rolls on chance events. I am a tabletop gamer who developed his own tabletop game, but I still found myself annoyed by this feature. It is not a thing in Divinity Original Sin 2, and that alone gave me more freedom in my interactions. Far less was left to chance, which took away from what choices I was finally given in Baldur's Gate 3. Of course, this carries over to the environments I explored in both games with similar evaluations. I won't go on and on here. Divinity Original Sin 2 offered far more environmental interaction, in my opinion, with fewer preordained paths for you to travel. Divinity Original Sin 2 championed player agency in this way, but how does that impact your ability to affect characters in the story too? Which brings us to our next point, customization. Now, in Baldur's Gate 3, we are given clearly defined classes with set growths and progression systems. In Divinity Original Sin 2, it is presented in the same way, but in practice, it is completely different. With a closer observation, we can see immediately during character creation, we have the customization options beyond our character's appearance and stats. Selecting to be a conjurer doesn't mean we are limited to magic and abilities or spells within that class. In fact, Divinity Original Sin 2 doesn't really have classes at all. They're more like recommendations to set your path. You can literally delve into any and all schools of magic with your characters. I wouldn't recommend it, but the option is there. As opposed to Baldur's Gate 3, where you are much more limited in how your character grows and progresses, where you'll be forced into certain classes with no freedoms outside of that class. Don't even get me started about the application of those growths. I cannot stand having a limit to spells that is only offset by the progression of time. I am not a fan of this at all. In Divinity Original Sin 2, I can use a greatsword, summon undead, and while poisoning my enemies, all from the same character. I might not make the most capable character by doing so, but I have the freedom to make that character who I want to be, when I want to be. This, of course, affects the game to a larger degree as far as freedom than what's allowed in Baldur's Gate 3. For me, this is a very big deal. Please give me so much freedom that I can face consequences for it. Consequences brings us on to our next point, combat. Arguably, more consequences are felt in combat than anywhere else in gaming. Divinity Original Sin 2 does a great job of punishing its players in diverse and interesting ways. Baldur's Gate 3 has several mechanics to watch for, but overall performs the same in each battle. Aside from things that you're fighting, not much is different between fights. Sure, we have terrain effects in Baldur's Gate 3, but to a much smaller degree than Divinity Original Sin 2. Also, in Baldur's Gate 3, those effects have little application outside of what is pre-designed in the game, whereas in Divinity Original Sin 2, we can create giant fields of poison, light them on fire, and then electrocute the clouds as an added measure. When you're playing and having fun, the toys you're playing with matter. Not only how many you can use, but to what effect and how often. Divinity Original Sin 2 wins in this category all day, every day. Baldur's Gate 3 is just too limited in what it allows players to do. I know this is because it's based on D&D, but that will one day be the hill it dies on. Limited number of casts is an easier way to track abilities and spells while tabletop gaming, but makes for a less than desirable experience in a video game. As a result of more spell freedom, the combat in Divinity Original Sin 2 feels far more intuitive and expressive. It encourages imagination, rewards creativity, and doesn't create the same monotonous gameplay loop that I felt Baldur's Gate 3 did in combat. This static consistency isn't just a reality because of spells, but also gear. That brings us on to the next point, loot. Let's be honest, I know I'm not the only loot goblin here. What you find matters. Those dopamine hits when you crack those crates, boxes, corpses, or chests open really can drive a good time. Well, Baldur's Gate 3 doesn't allow for much of this. As I said before, static consistency. Most items are the same per playthrough, and this is great for those who want to plan the perfect run based on others' experiences or their own and additional playthroughs. For me though, this is horrible. The first time I played a game, if I can finesse the spoilers that is, I will be surprised by every item I find. But my prospects of enjoying an additional playthrough are severely hindered. I don't mind this with legendary items as they bear so much significance. But anything below that, I want to enjoy the mystery, surprise, and even the disappointment as I find those items. What is worse is that Baldur's Gate 3 kills your lust for exploration almost entirely. I don't need to scour through 15 boxes in this hidden back room because I know that no matter what, I won't find anything of significance here, or anything at all. That really burned my britches in Baldur's Gate 3, I'm not gonna lie. Opening boxes to perilously find nothing over and over again, that's maddening. In Divinity Original Sin 2, you always have the prospect of finding something in even the most mundane of lootables. A little thing called Lucky Charm makes it to where you can find some very powerful items from the most insignificant of sacks in any given animal pen or back alley. It is amazing. Without a doubt, Divinity Original Sin 2 is killing here in this category. So, what's the verdict? Well, I try to keep it short. I may have ranted along the way a bit, but I definitely have drawn my conclusion. Which game is better? Baldur's Gate 3 or Divinity Original Sin 2? Baldur's Gate 3 is a modern eye candy in storytelling and allows players to enjoy D&D rules on a PC in amazing ways. While Divinity Original Sin 2 tells a powerful story that is full of suspense and mystery without holding your hand along the way, allowing you to tackle the same obstacles in a dozen different ways. While both games are remarkable and are clearly juggernauts in the CRPG world, with that said, I believe Divinity Original Sin 2 is the better game pound for pound. If it had been released 6 years later with the same support Baldur's Gate 3 had, I believe it would be the better game in every way. Something I firmly believe will be true of Divinity, Larian Studios' next project. Tell me what you think. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? And if so, tell me why. Tell me all about it in the comments, please. Also, be sure to leave me a like and a subscribe if you enjoyed the video, as it really helps me in my efforts in creating enjoyable content. Huge shout out and thank you to my soldiers. My soldiers are the ones who go above and beyond in supporting my efforts, and I'm very grateful. If you would like to join my army too, don't hesitate to do so. We are excited to have you with us. Keep shining out there, and until next time, bye.